we watched that every day, every week. And then the leading indicators going into each process was generally a daily huddle number. So if something was off by the time we got to our weekly management meeting, and you're like, okay, what's wrong? Right. And we could drill down into level 2 and level 3 in each process box to say what's broken in marketing that's stopping it from being green, or what's broken in sales, or what's broken in customer success. And when we got our core, and for us, the core values thing was really huge. When we finally got the right core values that really represented the 4 founders, and we started measuring our people against that, we had to get 50% of our people replaced, and we had 40 people. So we did it. We had a 51% turnover in 2018 because we were like, my goodness, we do not have the right people here. And that's why we're so frustrated with stuff.
Hey, welcome to this week's episode of The Freedom Experience. I'm your host, Jean Moncrief, and my guest today is Catherine Dahl. Now, Catherine's an extraordinary entrepreneur. She took a business that was pretty much failing at the time. They had 100,000 in annual revenue, about 6 people on the team, and 19 customers. And over a 10-year period, she took that business to 20 million in annual recurring revenue, 146 people, 146 employees, and ultimately led them to an exit of over 100 million. So in this episode, Catherine shares her story of rebuilding Beanworks, including having to kind of remortgage a house to save the business, and ultimately to having to get rid of half of the team to build the culture that she wanted, a culture that would make sure that the business truly thrived. So Catherine shares she emphasizes the importance of hiring the right people and the difficulty she's faced to find those good people, particularly sales leads. It took her 7 times to find the right person to lead the sales organization or the sales function in her business. And today she helps business leaders, entrepreneurs, to make sure that they don't make the same mistakes. So she coaches those companies and coaches those leaders through the kind of chaos that she went through to build a really good business. This episode's packed with advice on scaling, on leadership, and of just creating a culture that drives success. So grab your notebook, get a pen. You don't want to miss this. You're going to want to make some notes, and let's dive in. Here's my conversation with Catherine. Welcome to the show. Thanks very much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean, for having me. This is awesome.
Brilliant. So curious about how you got into building a Beanworks and where it all started.
Well, yes, as we're having our pre-podcast conversation, I happened to be connected to a fellow from South Africa who had started the original company called Bean Services, and I was a fractional controller because at the time was I a CMA? I can't remember when we merged, but we're now all CPAs in Canada. But the accounting designation in Canada used to be 3 different types of designations, and I was the more operationally focused one, which was a management accountant. And so I was in working for myself at the time and kind of fractional controlling for an online accounting services firm called Ledgers Online. And so he put me into this little real estate company to fix their mess. And in that process, I ended up meeting. He was also advising the CEO of this tech company, Jared Levitin, and he said, "Okay, well, you help him roll this out. These are an alpha or beta client." And that's how I met the original product and the original company and CEO. And then he asked me to write an article about AP automation in the local British Columbia-based CMA magazine. Yeah, we had to have been separate then because it was a CMA magazine. You had to be a CMA to get to author an article. So, okay. And I got credit for the extra. I got the professional development credits for doing it. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. It's great. So I started looking into the subject material, getting to know the market and the competitors and where it's at, because I had never even heard of AP automation. And I thought, wow, this is a great idea. Who likes doing payables? Nobody. So you want to control them, but you don't want to do the work. And so I thought that was really brilliant. The idea of it was brilliant. I thought he had invented it, that there was nobody doing it. Turns out, yes, there were. And in fact, OpenText, as we were talking about earlier about where your company landed, they had purchased some of the old school versions of it. They were all, install, not cloud-based. There were certainly no cloud-based ones, really.
Was this
Bill.com.
around 20,
This was
2000?
2009.
Okay.
Well, he started the company in 2008. So maybe 2010 is when I first met him. I'm trying to remember the timing of it all. Somewhere in the beginning of 2010 or late 2009, somewhere around there. And he was really kind of building out. The product was really looking more like what Expensify was eventually trying to do. And Expensify started in 2008. So they were nobody heard of them either. And cloud computing wasn't a thing yet. So
Yeah.
we had never owned cloud software servers in our office. So we had to be our own host provider. Like it was that primitive.
I remember those
And
days. Yeah.
yeah, and people didn't know what cloud was, and so there was a whole bunch of I got involved in that company, had to educate the marketplace as best as possible into what the heck do we mean by cloud and what is API automation. I have a payables module in my accounting software, okay, but it doesn't do API automation, and so there was a lot of that, and we sadly took some money from someone we shouldn't have, and that resulted in the company having a demise in 2011, in December 2011, and Jared was like, I don't want to keep doing this, but we did have customers, we did have revenue, very small, but he's like, and I had already professionally put it out there that this is the future of accounting workflow. And so I couldn't really back away from that. So I said, okay, I'll take the CEO role and I'll restart it with the little group of people that were really dedicated. That out of the first company, there were 6 of us. And so we started the company with revenue. We started it with customers. We started it with 6 employees and a member of the board who was the previous CEO. And then we had to kind of stabilize the old platform, which was not built well, and then rebuild it because we knew that it was kind of not, we couldn't even move it. So it was just like, it was not good. So, and I'm like, I don't know anything about code. So that wasn't my area.
So you don't come from a software background.
No,
What about your
never.
entrepreneurial background at this stage? Did you come from an entrepreneurial background?
I came from CBC. I was a
Okay.
finance manager for CBC in Vancouver at the time.
Canadian,
But that was
Canada
brief.
Bank.
Yeah, BBC
Yeah.
version in Canada. And then the jobs I had before that were private sector or nonprofit, and they were all business manager type roles. So either somewhere between a controller and a VP of finance type role, but generally involving, in a small organization, involving all the areas of the business that are OpEx, so managing HR, IT, blah, 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 all that stuff, facilities. And so I had a lot of experience kind of broadly across, managing a budget and developing a budget, strategic planning and all that stuff. So, and years of managing people. So I had that to bring to the table, but I didn't have a thing. I knew nothing about how to be a tech CEO. I remember thinking it was crazy that companies that had no revenue or very little revenue and no profit could be valued at millions of dollars, as I discovered as I got into, and then tens of billions of dollars as I got into the game more. So I had to educate myself. So I spent the first couple of years like learning how to do all the things this tech CEO needs to learn. And that eventually led me to Metronomics, a long and windy road. But we did get the first version of the software stable. Then we started building the second one. We were able to grow organically, a few more customers. So we kind of had about 300 grand in recurring revenue in those first 2 years, each year. And then the third year, we launched the new platform. We had to move everybody because we said, look, if you just be patient for us, we'll move you for free, and we're going to build you a way better version 2. And so it took a total of 4 years to get through that whole process. We were able to put new customers on the new platform earlier than that, but we and then we didn't. That's tough to do when you're trying to manage an existing customer base with users. So we had 19 customers that had 52 companies. So there are 52 databases, and each company had users in it. So I don't know, we had hundreds of users in there that we were keeping happy while we had our dev team of 3 that support this and build this, right? And we were building the next generation of the software, which had to be a multi-tenant, multi-entity platform. And nobody was doing that at the time, except for Salesforce. So we're like, okay. And then we had to move it out of the States into Canada in order for Canadian companies to use it because of the rules at the time around information. Then we had to move it to Amazon Web Services when we realized we needed a different, more robust system. So we had all that going on too, which was crazy. And we always never quite had enough people. But I did eventually joined Ace Tech in Vancouver, and that led me to Shannon and scaling up stuff because she was a scaling up coach at the time. I had actually met Shannon in 2012 in my very first year when she exited Subservio, and I was trying to get her to be an investor, and she
Oh,
instead
right. Yes. Okay.
she just gave me some good advice. It's good for customers. Switch to annual billing, and I'm
Which
like,
I hope was
oh.
valuable in itself.
It was actually that got us through year two,
Yeah.
and then it helped with future years. But most we did eventually end up like that. But a lot of customers didn't want to pay annual, so it was only sort of enterprise level customers are good with that. SMB market is not so. That's where we sat.
No.
The harder for them to come up with the cash in advance. So that's kind of how it got going. And then we built it up. We think we got up to about 7 million in revenue when we sold, and we sold in 2021. But because we had put the metronomic system in place and got that flywheel, got that KFFM spinning fast, even with the interference of the parent company, because they didn't see the value in leaving our systems intact. They were like, oh, no,
Okay.
no, we bought your technology. From the innovator's dilemma perspective, they bought our technology thinking they could put it into their distribution channel. But it turned out that we also brought really great operating processes and execution and accountability processes. And when they and that's what, and we had fantastic numbers that they were like, wow, if we could get this everywhere, that'd be great. So it's like, great, if you want that, then you need to do what we're doing. But instead they're like, no, we're the parent. You're going to do what we do. And so when they put us into their system, they broke everything. And so
Yeah.
after the first year, I'm like, oh, we went from growing the year we got acquired, which was there was COVID, and then where we dropped down to 70% year over year. We went back up to 85 in 2021, and we would have tracked back up to our 100, which we were aiming for in 2022. But they started pulling apart the KFFM connections, and so who reported to whom, and who was accountable for what. And when you don't have those clear lines of accountability, execution falls apart. And that's exactly what happened. So they're still growing faster so there's 4 different softwares they were amalgamating into one platform. And the AP solution is still the fastest growing segment, but they're not growing anywhere near as fast as they could be growing. They just kept going with the systems, right? Yeah. So marketing, they broke marketing first, the very beginning of the process. And then we're like, okay, we need marketing working in order for sales to work. And then sales has to start jimmy rigging and hacking stuff in order to hit their numbers. And then when they hit their numbers with that in that methodology, you end up having a high churn rate. So then you're at the bottom, right? So that's pretty much what's happened. So their overall ARR growth rate has slowed significantly. I think they might still be around 20% year over year, which they think is fantastic. So I'm like,
I was thinking, just for the audience, that this idea of a KFFM or key function flow map is something that we use in metronomics to look at the key functions that put money in the bank. And you'd obviously use that in then building up Beanworks. So what are the key functions? Marketing, sales,
yeah, for
customer
us,
onboarding.
for most software companies, it's most companies, you're obviously going to have some form of marketing process to generate business, and then you have a sales process somewhere in order to close that business, and then it might deviate after that depending on the type of business you are. But in software, it's usually customer success is then the next. They implement the product, get people using it, or make sure that the people are using it, and then finance, they do the billing process and collect the cash. So that's kind of the typical software cycle for a cash. I mean, in the good old days of scaling up, which is where I learned this the first time, is cash conversion cycle. But now it's, as it's evolved in metronomics into the key function flow map, it's a much more strategic dashboard that we found to be critical, because that was for us. We watched that every day, every week, and then the leading indicators going into each process was generally a daily huddle number. So if something was off by the time we got to our weekly management meeting, and you're like, okay, what's wrong, right? And we could drill down into level 2 and level 3 in each process box to say what's broken in marketing that's stopping it from being green, or what's broken in sales, or what's broken in customer success. And the customer success one was, unfortunately, we started getting really good at the first 2. And the third one could have been much, much better, but we got bought while we were working on it. I still didn't have the right leader in that role. So again, it goes back to all these other pillars of the system, where right seats on the bus in the right roles. Nice. And so I was still working on that and trying to get that one working better. And it's then everything got pulled apart, and I had nobody working for me anymore.
So you folks were in your huddles every single day,
Yeah,
looking at your key function flow map, looking at those numbers, and you knew come the meeting, your weekly meeting, if something you had your finger on
I
the
already
pulse, and
knew. Yeah.
you could
Yeah,
pick up solutions.
we didn't use the KFFM function daily. We used the numbers but the
Okay,
KPIs that or the metrics that were used in the KFFM as a leading indicator usually
gotcha. Yeah,
would have been the ones that were in the daily huddle. And so we would know every day, are we on track? So that by the time we got to the end of 7 days, or we're at our weekly meeting, that we would then look at the KFFM dashboard and say, okay, we're not surprised. We know we've been looking at these leading numbers every day.
yeah.
So there we're happy or we got a problem. And then before that meeting, because we use a level 10 format, you have an IDS section, issues, discussion, solutions. And so we would put those in ahead of time. And so it'd be like, okay, whoever's got red metrics needs to get in there and say, hey, I need help with this. This isn't working, or I don't know why this isn't working. So we're going to have to discuss it and dive deeply into it and figure it out. Or I have a solution and I'm just going to, and I'll run it by you all and then we'll implement it post meeting. So that's kind of how it worked. Was it perfect? No. But it really, I think, was key to us getting that flywheel moving faster. And that was the hard part.
I was going to hold this question to the end, but because we're talking about it right now, I'm quite interested, Catherine. What's one idea that you'd share with founders who are kind of reaching out for that repeatable sales motion? I mean, imagine that's something you had to get going. And if you reflect on Beanworks, what's something that you could share with founders on that?
In terms of just the sales process?
Yeah, just kind of getting that repeatable sales motion going in
Well,
the
so
early days.
I think for Beanworks, the number one thing that got us moving into a repeatable sales process was hiring the right sales leader.
Okay.
I'm an
Yeah.
accountant, so I was working with various consultants and trying out various leaders. I had at least 3 or 4 that I'd hired that just nothing was happening. I'm like, they sounded great. They looked great on paper. They sounded great in the interview. But I had no way of really understanding until we started putting some of these KPIs in place, which this would have been in 2016. So it kind of started around 2015, 16 for when we started trying to do anything around like Rockefeller habits. And KFFM did not come till after that because
Okay.
that was later. But even just trying to understand, I can't figure out why we can't get our sales machine moving. I had to hire the right person. So I had one consultant who I was working with who's charging me the least of anyone I'd ever paid for any advice on sales. And I was reading, he and I were working together part-time. He was helping me to figure out if my current director of sales was the right fit. I also had a sales advisor. So I had 2 checkpoints. One, I was paying options. So I could say, okay, both of them are telling me that the paid guy's telling me this, maybe because I'm paying him. The other guy he's not going to get anything unless we're successful. So he's going to give me the truth, right? And he was
Yeah.
a really great sales leader. He sold his tech company the same year I sold mine for more than I sold mine for. And he was phenomenal, but definitely a sales leader, and he knew how to do it. So he could build his own sales cycle process. But I was not a sales leader. So my biggest struggle was really not even understanding that I didn't need to be a sales CEO, which I thought I had
Okay.
to be. I thought I had to
Yeah, because
somehow become an expert in a subject I didn't even like. So I was like, I don't like sales process. I'm not interested in sales process. I think the whole thing's yucky. I don't like calling people prospects as if
yeah.
they're like, even just the words bothered me. So I was like, I love the product. So I was reading Steve Jobs's biography, the one Walter Isaac wrote. It took me 3 holiday trips to get it done. It's such a big book, and I'm dyslexic, so reading hurts. So I'm like, but I finally got to a place where I was like, oh, I quite like this book. I'm going to finish it on the flight home. And so as I finished it, I closed the book and realized I am not a sales CEO, and neither was Steve Jobs. He was a
Nice.
product
Yeah.
guy. And he hired other people who are really great at sales process to deal with that. And he oversaw the product. And I'm like, that's what I need to do. And I knew at that point, the person who was really good at it was this consulting guy. So I landed on the tarmac and that on a Sunday night and texted him to say, meet me on the treadmill at 6:30 tomorrow morning at Steve, at the time was Steve Nash, because we would work out usually Tuesday mornings. But I said, I want to talk to you. We're going to walk and talk on Monday morning. And I just said, look, I need you to come work for me full time. You just tell me how much you want. Because at this point, I know you're the right person and I will give you my salary. I don't care. I just need it. I just knew that I needed the right sales leader. And now I'd go about it differently with the Metronomics toolkit. I could put together the right scorecard for a sales leader. I could access that easily through ChatGPT, through, a network of coaches or whatever. It's easy to now come put that together easier. And then therefore easier to hire. And as long as you can put accountability metrics to the functions, this is where I think a lot of people fail, is that they'd write a job description. They say, here's sales leader, you're supposed to do these things. And there's no key metrics other than lagging. Maybe a revenue metric might be in there, which is too late after, once you've missed it, you've missed it. Yeah. You can't go back and make revenue that was never there. So how can you tell within the first 60 days if your hire is the right one? And that is, I used to say to people, it took me 7 tries to get this guy. I had 7 different leaders before him. Not for very long. It's
such a difficult thing, finding a good salesperson, finding the right salesperson.
So I would say it's, it's also stage of business. Like, are you really early and it's biz dev and so then it's a marketing problem. So if you're the person, like I did the early sales, I closed the early deals in the early days as CEO because I loved the product. I knew exactly what the audience, the core customer wanted. It was easy for me to message to an individual, but I couldn't, that's onesies, twosies, right? I couldn't scale that. I couldn't create a process where I brought in complete strangers off the street and figured out how to get them to do what I did. So that's what I needed somebody else to do, who understood selling techniques and sales process and all that. And then market awareness. So if you're early stage, and it really does depend on your stage. Like when I brought Kareem in, I think maybe we're at $500,000 to $700,000 recurring revenue, maybe just shy of $1 million. I can't quite remember. But yeah, I'm going back in time. It's hard to say. Definitely less than $1 million for sure. And we blew. It took 6 years to get to $1 million. So let's do the math on that. So that was 2012, 2018. We crossed. Yeah. So I would have been probably in the $500,000 mark in terms of recurring revenue. Okay. And it took 18 months to kind of get everything moving. And then we crossed over $1 million and $2 million in the same year.
Wow. Okay.
So you just went
that kind of magic 1 million ARR milestone.
And then 2018, right? And we sold it 3 years later at 7 million. So we went from 1 million to 7 million in 3 years.
And you sold the business for over 100 million.
Yeah, because we had a huge multiple.
Yeah.
But that was good timing. 2021 was one of those bumper years. It's going to go down in history as like, the 2000 and 2007. Right before everything tanked.
Talking about that, did you have the exit in mind when you started the business or very early on?
Oh yeah. So I had invested in the first company.
Okay.
And I lost that money. So I was able to, I'm like, I have to recoup that. So the only way I was going to recoup that was keep going and get my money back, because I borrowed it against my house. I'm like, I had a mortgage. I had to get that paid off, and I had no retirement plan. So
there was no option.
Work forever, because I was never going to work in a place that would have a pension. Work forever and hope that my children do well and support me in my old age, or make this a success. That was it. I had a do or die situation. And my husband agreed that it was a do or die. And he used the product in his own company. He was an entrepreneur, but he had a lifestyle business. And he loved the product. He goes, this is a great product. I'm not even an accountant. This is a great product. I can use this easily. And I'm like, great. So he believed in it. So we kept putting more money in to the business in order to keep some level of equity for the exit. But we had a lot of people on our cap table, and we had a lot of founders. And And we brought some of the shareholders from the previous company who were not involved in the demise of it all, and gave them a bit of a lottery ticket. And at least one of them did, two of them did extremely well, and the rest were okay, not great, but two of them got the type of return. Just they had to wait a long time.
Was 10 years kind of on your mind, or did you have a
Well,
time?
no, my gosh. Like, when we started, I convinced the others that we could pull it off in 13 months.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right. I had no idea what I was talking about. I don't know how long it takes to build software or scale a company. And then as we got going and the reality of it all sunk in, it was like, okay, everybody, we're all in. So let's just keep going. The only 4 founders really stuck around to take it to exit. And those were the 4 of us that kind of took it to exit were the most like-minded. Like, that's where our core values came from. We all had the same work ethic. That's why even though we're all very different people, we really worked well together for the most part. And so we were like, yeah, okay, if we can do this, and we were all 10x thinkers in terms of and ready to put the effort in. Yeah. And so we just needed to find more people like us. And we made lots of hiring mistakes in the years before we figured out Scorecards and actually get an HR person in who can run the top grading process for you properly, and make sure you do reference checks the right way and all those things. Like, again, all the tools. Yeah. And part of why I became a coach and what we're doing now with our roundtable effort, trying to get in earlier to companies that are smaller, earlier stage startups, earlier stage companies, to say, like, if you want to be successful, you need a growth system. And if you want to grow fast and do it with the least amount of pain, there's always going to be pain and error and problems. But if you want to have the least amount of pain and the quickest, shortest distance to success, you've got to have a growth system. You got to have one that includes a strategic planning process, and it doesn't matter if you have a great strategy. Like, I'm talking to a prospect now who's like, we feel very confident in our strategy, but we are no longer executing well. It's like, oh, okay, but you're also they stopped using the growth system. And it's like, you got to, as boring as it gets, you got to keep the scorecards need to be, you got to keep, and as you scale, the game changes. So we were different at 1 in 7 is very different. Now we had 80 people. And then when we grew to 160 people before I left. So there's like, the game changes. So you constantly have to be rethinking some of those things where you say, well, is this really the right scorecard is this the right role at the right time? And do we have the right person? Are they able to stay with us? Can we develop them to stay with us as we grow? Or are we just going to have to be polite about it and say, we've overscoped you. You can't do this anymore. So we're hiring over you, or we're replacing you. It's one of the two. So we had to go through that.
Yeah, thinking about those scorecards and thinking about the future and putting together a scorecard for somebody that we're bringing on now that is kind of be whether solving a problem, which is perhaps a 2-year problem. And that's
if you're scaling fast, 2 years is the timeline, and you're going to be changing that role in 2 years. You're either changing the role or you're changing the person. That's how the Valley operates in terms of tech startups. I used to go to SaaStr all the time, and I remember they finally had some stuff on engineering because I was trying to hire a head of engineering, and I really wanted a female in the role, and because I tried to get a diversity in my company and get it to 50-50. It's hard to do in a tech setting when a lot of the programmers were males. So, and a lot of salespeople are guys. So you end up with a lot of women in marketing. So it was hard to get diversity.
Men in all the tech and the sales side.
And so I was desperately seeking a female leader, and I ended up at SaaStr running into a woman that I knew in Vancouver that thankfully at the time I was wearing my green Beanworks hoodie instead of this one, and I stood out. So she was like, hey. And I ended up hiring her right after that, but I'd gone to a session that they put on about how to hire a head of engineering. And I was like, fantastic. I'm not an engineering person either. So I'm like, I don't know sales. I don't know programming. So I had to go and find resources to help fill in the gaps at the CEO level. What do I need to know? So this guy presented the 10 characteristics or functions, the 10 things a head of engineering does. Or maybe it wasn't even 10, might have been 7. And he goes, no, I think it was 10. He said, you can only optimize for 3. So you got to pick the 3 most important ones at your stage. And then he showed graphically, and I took photos of each, early stage, high growth stage, a little bit later stage, how those and the functions were the same in all 3 stages, but the varying degrees to how. So at the beginning, it was like a good programmer. Really have they have to be able to write code. Later on, they don't write any code.
Yeah.
right? They make sure somebody else does, but the function still sits at that the software gets produced, right? And so I was like, oh, right, I don't need a head of engineering to write code. I actually need a head of engineering who can manage chaos. Healthy chaos was on there. Manage healthy chaos was actually on there as a function. And I was like, I love that. Manage healthy chaos. So I put that on her scorecard.
Oh, lovely.
Manage
That's
healthy
brilliant.
chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I can't quite remember what I used for KPIs, but I always say KPIs. I know I should be using the word metrics, but to me they're the same. But we did end up with and I gave her the scorecard, and then she came back before I hired her with her 90-day plan on how and proof that she could do all those things. Here's how I've done this in other places. And I'm like, I wish I could do that for every senior hire after that. But then I was not consistently doing that. I should have.
You're working with roundtables with smaller
Yeah.
startups at the moment, and
Yeah.
I guess there's an argument to be had that startups kind of thrive off a bit of that chaos. Is this the right time to be bringing the structure in that comes in the form of a system like Metronomics, and how easy is that to introduce that?
Well, we're it's an experiment. We start the first group in January, but we are putting together the program in the same way I had to kind of learn some of the elements of the system before I was ready to implement the system and also have a coach help me.
Gotcha.
It took a couple of years from when I first learned about it, which probably would have been 2014 when I first started learning about it, and I didn't start using
and self-implementing.
Yeah, I was self-implementing,
Okay.
yeah. But I wasn't, and we were early stage, but I still had a pretty good sized management team. So the startups that we're working with in the roundtable are smaller than that. So they could be 3 people, they could be 7 people, they could be 10 people, but they're kind of in that like smaller size, and they have a smaller size management team. So they're not quite big enough to have a that two-day annual planning facilitation. A little hard to do that with 2 or 3 people, right? So but they can start putting some of the key execution pieces in. So you get them thinking about strategy, work on things like the market map, like they can start exercising those muscles, learn what they are, understand the order of events. Because the other thing that I think is really critical is, which I learned, I think, better from BE 2.0, reading that book, that the order of events is critical on that 1-page plan development. You need your core purpose first.
Yeah.
Then you need your BHAG. Then you need your core values. There's no point in setting priorities when you haven't done that. There's no point in creating a scorecard for a job if you haven't got those 3 things. And then you need your 3-HAG. And in BE 2.0, at least he's moved from a 5-year plan to a 3 to 5-year plan.
Yeah.
So 3 years fits better. I agree with it being a shorter window of time. And if you get them in that order, then it gets pretty clear what you need to do. So I do think you can do that from day one. And Shannon says that about Subservio. There were 2 people in that company when they started, and she said they had daily huddles from day one, and they did their 36-month plan. They did everything, and there were only 2 people. And they sold the company in 36 months.
Getting those habits in from day one, and
way better, especially hiring, right? Like, I don't know about if you think back to your company experience, if you'd had scorecards from day one for your very first hire, and the top grading hiring methodology in place from day one, you'd make way less hiring mistakes. And when we got our core, and for us, the core values thing was really huge. When we finally got the right core values that really represented the 4 founders, and we started measuring our people against that, we had to get 50% of our people replaced, and we had 40 people. So we did it. We had a 51% turnover in 2018 because we were like, my goodness, we do not have the right people here. And that's why we're so frustrated with stuff. And when we flipped into hiring for core values as well as skill set, then we ended up with a totally different vibe and culture. And it was so much fun. Like,
yes, funny. I was going to ask you about the Beanworks culture, but
it was very
like...
culty, but like in a good way. I had one bad review on Glassdoor that talked about our cult environment, and everything this person described in the Glassdoor review was all the Rockefeller habits things. Like, he was a low-level manager, and he's like, they require you to read books and they require you to go to all these meetings, and they require you to repeat these mantras about core purpose, core values. I'm like, so I was said to my HR person, don't take that down. Make sure that stays there. Anyone who reads it and doesn't like
attract those.
I want to repel anyone who doesn't like it and attract someone who does. So that's perfect, because that is what we do. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not a negative thing. It's a positive thing. And everybody else, I mean, the last boat party we did, I had a young guy from Toronto come up to me I'd never met. And he was like, I am so happy to be working here. This is the best company I've ever worked for. You built an amazing culture. This is like just a random guy says this to me, and I'm just like, wow, that's a nice way to leave. It's like, okay, this is awesome. Now I can't speak to how the culture is now, but
yeah,
it was really great at the time. And so people enjoyed going to work. It was a fun place to be.
And I was saying to you at the beginning, I worked with this Canadian company around the same time in Toronto, and there were just so much diversity, so many different people from different parts of the world, and that all came together. It was a very much a shared sort of core values, but very diverse culture, which was fantastic. It was probably one of the companies with the most diverse culture I've ever worked in. What were some of the challenges that you had through the growth? I mean, you start off with 6 odd people and a handful of shareholders. What are some of the big challenges you have in growing the business?
Oh, raising capital was always challenging.
Yeah.
A female founder over 40 with no previous tech experience, that definitely worked against me. And I was always going out for money at the wrong moment to the wrong type of investor. So understanding the right, and we were so diluted to start with. So it was really, I didn't want to go down a notch. Like if I was in between two stages, if I was in between a seed and a Series A, I didn't want to go down to seed. I wanted to go up to Series A.
Okay,
right?
good.
So,
yeah.
So that made it harder. It was like climbing Mount Everest just to raise capital, because we raised $21 million in the end, Canadian, but that's still great because we sold for 115. So everybody got some good money there. And all the employees had options. So that helped keep everybody motivated on the goalpost. So that would be one big challenge. I would always, as people, right leadership team. Again, if I were to do it all differently, I'd get the scorecards in place right away. I'd figure out exactly who my senior leaders need to be. I'd make sure that team is all A players first, and then get them to make sure their teams are all A players. So those were big challenges. And then, again, like I said earlier, we didn't quite get because of those challenges, we didn't get that third box in the KFFM working as well as it should have. And so and even my finance box didn't work as well as it could have either. So 2 halves of it were going really well, the other 2 not as well. And again, I would peg it back to very nice people, but not the right leaders in those boxes. They didn't own them the way that the marketing and the sales ones did. The marketing and the sales leaders were really good. They were like, yep, no, I want to win. They were true A players. They wanted to win. They wanted to see their score up there. They wanted to be the ones to say to the other people, you're a loser, I'm a winner.
And that's what A players want, right?
Yeah, they had that mindset, and we didn't, which is truly an A player, right? The A players love to win, and they want to know that they're winning. So they're not afraid of metrics, and they're not trying to hide behind something they think is not the right metric. And there's all those things that, now that looking back, I can say that. At the time, it's hard when you're in it, but lots of nice people, but just not always the right type of leader with the right experience to move the needle on those boxes.
And am I correct in understanding that you had each of the members of the team on their own sort of personal 3-year plan as well? We talk about 3 haggle.
The 1-page personal plan?
1-page personal plan.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember when we didn't do that so much. I think we would talk about it with our coach, like on annual planning, we might talk about, he'd have to say, what's your personal why? People do need to have their own motivation for why they're doing something, right? Not just, I'm just go because it's a job, right? When you're in a world that we were in, right? Venture-backed startup is different than lifestyle company. That is, and I say lifestyle company, meaning there's no investors. that are expecting a return, and the owners are the people who run the CEO is the owner, and then they can choose to do what they want to do and grow at whatever pace they want because it's their company, and that's a different it's different mindset for your staffers possibly, right? Unless you profit share or something like that. So but I think A players need to have some level of, I'm either doing something cool and exciting and I really love what I'm doing, or there's a win at the end that they're trying to get to that's more than their day-to-day job, in order for them to be highly motivated. But yeah, going through the personal exercises is always good.
So having those A players, but going through those personal exercises with the team, and because they are A players and they want to know where they're going, and they want to win, and they want clarity and a purpose.
The one thing we tried to do, and again, all these things came in not quite in the right order. And I would do at not maybe in really small companies right away, but certainly when you get to a place where you can hire an HR manager and you have some management team who have employees, that you have a 2-year plan in the scorecard. So there, whenever we do the reviews out of Metronomics, we did start instituting an extra custom section at the bottom saying, what's the 2-year path for you? Where do you want to be in 2 years? Okay. You want to be a manager? Do you want to be somewhere else? Like you might want to be a product, maybe you're this and you want to be that. And we had employees that were like, yeah, I want to move into product. I'd like to go there. Okay, then we're going to help you do that in order to retain them.
Kind of about growth for growth's sake as well. There's growth for individuals and people in the business knowing where they
which is part of the top grading process, right? Like if you're implementing all of top grading, then you should be doing that as well. And I would do that sooner than later so that you understand if you feel confident you have 95% A players, then you do a 2-year plan for them so they stay. And it gives you an ability to react if they're not happy, because they'll tell you, right? And so you want to be able to say, okay, well, there's got to be an opportunity here, because those people tend to be more ambitious. If somebody doesn't have any, and maybe they just say, hey, I just want to be a really great programmer, and say, okay, great. So then the path is to get to senior programmer where you make more money. And then maybe eventually, do you want to get into like in 2 years later, you want to be a principal, right? You don't want to manage people, but you want to be really good at your craft. So how do we help you do that?
How do we help you be?
What courses can we get you on? What programs can you do? That kind of stuff. So we definitely did that.
So you've been through taking a startup through 10 years, growing it up to being able to sell it at 100 million. Along the way, you had a coach.
Yes.
When you reflect on that, what makes a great coach for you at the moment, or when you look back?
I think a great coach is somebody you can be vulnerable with when you're having your one-on-ones. You share your worries with them. It's someone who helps keep you accountable to the system, that you're operating the parts of it, and you're getting support, you're getting clarity when you need it from your coach. Like how do I make that piece work? For me, it was confidence building. Like I needed someone to tell me I could do this, as in be a CEO of a tech company when I'd never done that before. And so those were the big things that I got from coaching that continued to make the coaching very, very valuable to me. I've become friends with my coach. He's now my mentor coach.
Okay, lovely. That's Damien,
yeah, Damien. I had him for 6 years. And we started with, he was a scaling up coach, and we kind of, all these things that are now in Metronomics as a nice, neat package, came together while I was implementing scaling up. So I didn't, and scaling up doesn't quite say do it in any particular order. So we started with the Rockefeller Habits list, and we're like, well, we'll just pick 3 of these and in any random order, and let's just start doing them. That's how we started it. And so I was like, oh, well, we probably should do core values. This looks like a fundamental piece. And we didn't come up with the right ones because we didn't have a coach to guide us through that process. We had 8, and I'm like, and no one can remember them.
Can't remember them.
So now when I coach people or to even advise people, I say 3 or 4.
Yeah, and that's it.
Keep it tight. And then they'll say, well, I said, well, usually some of them, the ones you put in there are fluffy things that are not actionable. So therefore they're not really a core value in the way core values are used in the system.
Yeah.
So do you really need them? And then the other part is you can't remember them. So I try to get people to do an acronym that's related to their company. So it's
Oh yeah, I
really
love
easy.
that. Yeah.
So Beanworks, because it was Beanworks, we use the word bean. So
Okay.
our core values spelt the word bean.
What were those values?
Be an entrepreneur, or
Okay.
we then merge that eventually into beantrepreneur.
Okay. Nice.
And then that's the word, but the actual core value tagline, so you can remember what that is, was to be tenacious and take ownership.
Okay.
So we're not asking you to be an entrepreneur. We're not saying, hey, you're going to run this company and you're going to go rogue and do your own thing. We want you to act like an entrepreneur does by being tenacious and taking
Yeah.
ownership. That was the verb in the word. And then E was exceed expectations. It should have been taglined. In hindsight, I realized I did this wrong. It was, exceed the expectations, or strive to exceed expectations for all your stakeholders, customers, employees, vendors, and shareholders. But what it should have said was set the right expectations and then make sure you exceed them.
Yeah.
Because managing expectations is more important than setting crazy. Because what happens, people would set crazy high expectations and they couldn't get there.
Yeah.
With
That's so
customers
true.
and everybody, and it created us, it sent us down the wrong path. So that was a mistake that I would have liked to have not made. And again, that's something at the time I don't think my coach would like. I could now see that now because I've made that mistake. I can see that in hindsight, and I can share that with somebody, but and apply it to a different situation. A was all together, and so that was about it being a team. That we're a team.
Okay.
We're not a bunch of individuals. We have to work together. And the last one was never accept the status quo, and that's self-explanatory. So
Yeah.
constant improvement, like look to improve the processes. So that's how
Brilliant.
we, and then we baked it into our weekly meetings. So when we hired new people, we would bring them up to the front of the group and we'd say, do you, well, first we had to introduce them all one at a time. And so we did one per quarter, and we like, what does it mean to be an entrepreneur? So we would do things throughout that quarter as a company to try and display that core value, and then got the habit of people recognizing and rewarding those behaviors. And then we bake that into our brand new employee thing when they come in. We'd say, we'd ask them, have you seen what are our core values, and have you seen them in action? Because if you haven't seen them in action, we're doing something wrong.
You've got to bring them to life. They have to be
They
living,
have
right?
to be alive, and that means you've
Yeah.
seen them within the first 3 days you've been in this company,
Love
or
it.
something
Yeah.
wrong. And we got very good at it. So people knew what they were. There was never no one ever needed to look it up on the one-page plan. They had them all memorized. They knew what it was baked into the review process as it should be. We would do the assessments with our coach every quarter, right? That was also helpful. Like we had one wrecking ball that we kept for 3 quarters, and my coach was like, I'm gonna fire him if you don't. So we're like, yeah, gotta get rid of him, gotta get rid of him. But God, I should have gotten rid of him right away. I don't know why I waited. And my coach kept saying, I don't know why you're waiting. And I'm like, we feel like we can't get rid of him because we thought he was a high performer. But again, I'd say if we had really looked at his scorecard in the light of day in hindsight, he did not have the right scorecard. He was not the right person. And we should have seen that right away. We should have gotten rid of him 3
It's
or
one
4
of those,
months before we did.
yeah, all of us as owners, do we take too long, wait too long to make those difficult decisions, those tough
And I
decisions?
would say we wouldn't have seen any of that without a coach. So it's the coaching process that got us to do the assessment,
Yeah.
right? The A-player assessments, right? People don't even, I never knew what that was before getting a coach. I don't even know where that wasn't part of scaling up. That must have come through the metronomics system evolving into what it is today, because I totally don't remember reading that in scaling up. Yeah, can't
So
remember.
I'm conscious of time. I know we've probably gone a bit over. I've got one last big question for you, and then the podcast is called The Freedom Experience. What does freedom mean to you?
Uh, freedom means choice. Freedom
Being
for
able
me
to
is
yeah,
make the choices you want to make. Freedom is well, personal freedom, travel where and when I want, how I want, and I should be able to afford it. That's real freedom.
yeah.
But that's very few people get that. Maybe Bill Gates and Oprah Winfrey.
Well, I was
But
thinking back to you, yeah, what you said at the beginning, putting the whole house on the line, and
oh yeah, I risked
you
it
had to
all.
make this happen. You risked this all
Yeah,
for
I
freedom
would.
at the end, yes.
And I did, and my goal was freedom. I'm old enough to be in the genre of people who may remember the commercials about Freedom 55, the
Okay.
insurance companies. In Canada, there was an insurance company that I think it was only Canadian, where they would had some kind of insurance plan that gave you freedom to retire at 55. And I don't even know how that was
Wow.
possible, but somehow that was their tagline, Freedom 55, and it was quite well known. And most people in my age group know what that line means. And so I was like getting to a point at Beanworks where I was like, hey, this might actually happen at 55. And so I wanted to be free, financially independent, and not working at Beanworks by the time I was 55. And so we sold it when I was 54, no, 53, turned 54 that year. And wait, let me get this right. Because the summer I turned 55, which was last year, I was out. So I must have sold at 51. No, 52. And either way, the 3-year window that I was supposed to stay was going to be 56. So I said, okay, it's freedom 56 before I get my earnout piece at the end. But they let me out a year early.
You
So
you got out earlier, you escaped early.
1 year early.
1
So
year
I
early.
escaped a year early, and I was actually done by the time I turned 55. So I was like, yeah. So I said, I made it. I made the freedom 55. That
Did
was my
you
BHAG.
did you have any of that kind of the day after the exit, the day after that the freedom, any kind of, well, what's my purpose now? What
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm still in that. So the first bit after, it's
oh
like, oh,
really?
I'm going
Okay.
on a trip. Like, well, also at the time my dad passed away, so there was a lot going on
Okay.
right after I was let go. I had a month in Mexico. My dad passed away the next month, and then I went on a big long trip for 7 weeks. So I didn't even think about anything. I just went away for that first 6 months, pretty much. And then I thought, oh, and then I started doing a bit of angel investing. And I thought, well, I need to kind of think about what do I do now? I really did
You
have
didn't
an
have that
identity.
plan for what you're
No,
going to.
and I was very attached to my company and the
Yeah.
people and the product and this market. I was just very attached to all of it. So it was actually quite difficult to let it all go. And so I would say the it was 2023 was the yeah 20. So I thought I should have just taken a whole year off. I started dabbling in things
Okay.
too soon. So I didn't quite get enough headspace. So instead of 2023 being a full year off, I was kind of fingers in a few pots. And so I tried to start coaching too soon, for example, right? Like I was like, oh yeah, I should get going on this. And my heart wasn't fully in it until now.
Okay.
So, I needed a whole other year of just kind of not doing too much. And yeah, so that's 2024 has been kind of that. And so now 2025, I feel what my new purpose is, which is really to support. My focus right now is mainly trying to support early stage fintech companies in Canada with some investment stuff I'm doing and coaching women entrepreneurs. That's what I'm doing.
Brilliant.
So I'm trying to support female entrepreneurs.
So if you've got those links to that round table that we put into the show notes, if you've still got 5 places by the time we go up, we'll get those in and see if we can hope.
Yeah, we're going to do, we've got a couple spots left in this cohort. We will do another one in the spring and another one in the
Brilliant.
fall. But yeah, so I will send you those links to
Okay.
the landing page, and if anyone's interested,
We'll put
because
them in,
it's
yeah.
less expensive than a direct private coach. And the goal is that we want to help get those companies to a place where they have a big enough management team and company size that they need a private coach. So it does get to a place where you would need someone to facilitate your stuff and really just focusing on you. And obviously with Measurenomics, we have the network of coaches to spread that around and help people find the coaches that they need when the time comes. And then they're already kind of, working the system a little bit. So it's a little bit easier for everybody.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on. I really appreciate you spending some time with me and telling me a bit about your story. It's been fantastic, Catherine. Thanks very much.
This has been great fun. I really appreciate you having me on.